Good afternoon and welcome to my humble model railway, Bedstead Junction. Now this afternoon, now it's 2:15 in the afternoon, Wednesday, and it's very hot today. We've got a heat wave in the West Country. The temperature in this room, I think, is gone way over 80 now. I'm not sure. But don't seem to be anywhere to get away from this heat, so we'll plough on regardless, and we'll keep going with this as long as we possibly can. Now, I've been meaning to review a recent acquisition onto my model railway fleet, but not been able to do any videos as of yet because I've been doing a lot of household chores like gardening and stuff, so not been able to get the railway out, and it's been really too hot up here to get the railway out. We're going to have an attempt at this afternoon. Now, the actual item we're looking at is an Oxford Rail item. As a Great Western Railway towed brake van, GWR 6-wheel plated, late, and this one is Bridport. Now, the only Bridport that I know of, and I please correct me if I'm wrong, this probably relates to Bridport in Dorset, in which case, if that's true, that would have been a line that ran between Bridport and Maiden Newton. That's where the junction was for the Bridport Railway. That's the only one I can think of. What we'll do though is have a look at the model itself, and we'll see now. Okay, so we can see GWR towed brake van there, Oxford Rail, and the box it comes in there. You can see that quite well there now, with the contents inside. And there's the difference between this one and ordinary brake vans is the wheel configuration. Now we're going to get this out of the box. Okay, it comes in a kind of block of ice packaging there. You can see it quite well in there now. Okay, and we'll just get this out from here once I find out how to undo it. You'll have to forgive me if I get a little bit muddled this afternoon, simply because it's very hot up here, and I think that this heat is going to melt my brain at some point. Well, we'll have a try. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this particular one onto the radar in just a moment, but we'll have a good look at her close up. Okay, I don't know if that's in focus. It is. Bridport's RU, it says on there. And you can see it's got 6 wheels and not 4. Now, the more common kind of GWR brake van would have had 4 wheels, and there was a reason why they had 6 wheels. I'll go into that in just a second. Now, talking about the model, there are some very good reviews out there already which have actually gone over these models. Probably the main points that have been raised by some modelers is that fact that some people say there shouldn't be the window there. But I think they modelled this on one that was at the Didcot Railway Centre, and that one had a window in it, so that's why they put a window in the model. Some people think that that should have a steel blanking plate over it or something. And some people have actually criticised the brake rigging underneath. Now, not having ever been under one of these, I can't really judge on the accuracy of the model as far as brake rigging is concerned, and I've never seen one of these in real life either, so I'm not going to comment on the accuracy of the model, but that was the 2 main points raised about it. I'm quite happy for the actual window to be there. Okay, the central window on the door there, and I don't know if we can see inside there. We can see in there there's a handle, presumably to operate the brake. Okay, and to actually operate this, of course, it meant that the brake man had to come out onto this veranda in all winds and weathers to operate the brakes. Okay, now there's a reason why we got the 6 wheels on there, and that's that there were always increasingly heavier trains, and that seems to be a common theme on the Great Western Railway, on all the other big 4 railways that that ended up in the big 4. Heavier and heavier trains, and this was for the purpose of these brake vans, was mainly down to increase in coal train weights, and they were designed for use in the coalfields especially in South Wales. Now the idea behind this was that you would need more braking force, and of course you get more braking adhesion provided by 6 wheels instead of 4. Now the kind of chain I've assembled is one which is, I think, is quite appropriate because the locomotive we're about to see coming out in a moment to form the train is actually a Welsh coal engine. At least it was designed for the Welsh coalfields. And we'll talk a little bit about what I know about the coal industry as well, quite shortly too. So I hope this is going to be interesting for you to see. Now, obviously, the main theme is a humble brake van, but probably one of the most important vehicles on a goods train. One that was loose fitted and not sort of with straight through air brakes. Okay, so there we are. That's our humble brake van there. Okay, so we'll just pop her onto the rails, and we're going to get the train out. I'm just going to put the box to one side. Now, one of the things that I wondered about when I bought this particular wagon is how it would handle my layout. Okay, because obviously my layout is never out on a permanent basis. In fact, I only just put this one out just a short while ago, and there's just the one train on there for the purpose of this video. Something I will mention about this particular model: it appears to have metal wheels. So please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it appears to have metal wheels. Also, another detail you can see on there, and obviously you've got the little suspension springs down the side as well. So I'll show you that before we go onto the rails. Now we've got the railing wrap ready over there. Okay. And we'll just put her onto the rails. And we'll see if we can couple this brake van up. Now, some of my couplings can be temperamental, so you'll have to bear with me on this particular one. Now we can see if we can get ourselves into reverse, and we'll try to bring our locomotive out, which we'll also talk about. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to run her backwards just for a short while, then we'll see if we've managed to successfully couple up, and then we'll watch the train go round for a short while. And while we're here, we'll have a close look at the locomotive. Now it's a Great Western Railway 062 tank engine, designed especially for the Welsh coalfields by Charles Benjamin Collett. Now how these came about was a result of the 1923 grouping. I believe Charles Benjamin Collett became Chief Mechanical Engineer of the Great Western Railway in 1922, and then the Big Four came about in 1923. Now what the Great Western Railway did was that they absorbed a lot of independent railways that were operating in the Welsh coalfields. The most common kind of engine which they found in use there was the 062, and that they found to be more suitable for the actual working conditions in the Welsh coalfields. And we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. So we've got the 062 wheel arrangement. So you can see from here, from above, you've got the no leading wheels at the front, the 6 driving wheels, and then there's a pair of trailing wheels just under the cab. I think you just see it just underneath. Okay. And it's also got the Great Western Railway characteristics of the copper chimney, and the brass safety valve cover, and the whistles. Now, the difference between these and the prairie tanks, and you'd sort of say, well, what's the difference? Is it just a Prairie tank with the front wheels missing? Well, no. And that's, I mean, please excuse my utter ignorance, but that's what I actually thought this was going to be when I actually bought the model. But it's not. They're completely different engines altogether. The actual Prairie tank, the 262 Prairie tanks, had outside cylinders. These have got inside cylinders. Now I'm guessing that's to give the locomotive better clearance, so when manoeuvring its way around in its working environment. Okay. Now the actual model itself is made by Mainline, and being a Mainline model, that would have not been made any later than 1984, which is when Mainline actually ceased to operate in the model railway field. In fact, they got away from model railways in that year and decided to specialise in other areas of toys. Of course, the history goes on that there was then replica railways following on there, and then finally Bachmann. But this is a Mainline engine. Now, when I run it, it's just going to be a little bit noisier than the more modern offerings you'll find, and also it can be occasionally temperamental on points. Okay, so we might have a slight derailment. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, but as long as you run it at a low enough speed, it does go over points fairly well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put her into forward gear and just see what happens. There we are. Now we're away, and our brake van is quite successfully coupled there now. See it going by. Now these models actually run quite well at low speeds. Now, one thing we will have to do quite shortly is something I wasn't expecting, is that the battery has actually gone quite low on this camera, so I may have to stop proceeding just to change the battery. But hopefully, when I do that, you won't be able to see the actual join. Okay. Now what we got is I've got our 062 tank engine going round now. Now it does run quite well on the controller as well. Now we'll talk about the coalfields in a little while as well, which is actual intended environment for this actual 6-wheel towed brake van. Okay, and we'll talk about the design of the locomotive as well. That's putting it, because I thought the locomotive would go rather well with the brake van, both being for the same kind of intended use. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just stop the camera just for a moment, and we're going to just change quickly change the battery over for a fresh one. So just bear with me just a few seconds. Just bring that into view there. Now I'm sorry if there's a slight sort of break in continuity, but I just had to change the battery on this particular camera. It kind of just went without warning, so to speak. Now we're back on track now, hopefully. Now, as we say, we can see our locomotive going around, which is especially designed for the Welsh coalfields. Okay. Now the reason why the 062 was popular is that they were going. A lot of the lines were very, very sharply curved, and they had steep gradients on them in the Welsh coalfields, and it would go chimney first up the gradient, and then come back down bunker first. Then the actual two training wheels were sort of act like almost like leading wheels on the journey back down. Okay, so that's why this particular design was popular. Now, as far as the actual design is concerned, I say it was designed by Charles Benjamin Collett. And yes, I mean, unfortunately, when the Great Western Railway took over the actual Welsh coalfields, they found that a lot of the locomotives that were in use there were not in the best of condition. Okay, now the actual locomotive we can see is called a 5600 class. I think they then went on to become the 6600 class. I think the main difference being that they had a vent in the roof. Okay. Now the actual one we can see going around now, I believe to be the same as the one actually preserved in the Great Western Society at Didcot. fact, the one we got going around now is 6697, so this will be one of the second batch. And a total of 200 of these were built up to the year 1928. The first 150 being built at Swindon, and then the remaining 50 being built at Armstrong Whitworth at Scotswood on Tyne. And it was one of the early instances of the Great Western Railway using an outside builder. I mean, normally the actual all the locomotives would have been built at Swindon Works. The class turned out to be popular with their crews and gained a reputation for power, acceleration and speed capabilities, and in the end they found regular use on both passenger and freight work. The final one was actually withdrawn in 1966. So you can see they were very, very useful and numerous engines. Now, the actual coal industry itself was at the time very, very important to the industry of our country. In fact, the actual industrial revolution, pardon me, would not have taken place had it not been for the large supplies of coal in this country. In England and in Wales, large deposits of coal, and in fact there were also large amounts of coal fields in the West Country, in the Somerset. There were certainly lots in Somerset, which is very often forgotten about by some people. In fact, the last coal mine in the West Country was at Rithington, I believe, and that closed in 1973. Now, I've actually been down a coal mine, and that's in the Big Pit in Wales, and that gave me some kind of insight as to how the coal was actually extracted in the mines. Now, I'm guessing that these kind of engines like these would have been used to transport the coal from places like the Big Pit, and it would have been probably down to a main line or down to a port where the coal could be transported on further. Now, just sort of an interesting fact. I mean, one of the questions they asked was, how did they actually transport the wagons around the mines when they were below ground? And in that particular mine, they used pit ponies. Now, you would not believe this unless you actually saw the history, and you actually saw people speak who actually worked in the coal industry in the West Country. But because the coal mines or the coal seams were so sort of shallow, about 3 feet high or so, the actual wagons or trucks, coal trucks underground, were actually pulled by human beings, harnessed like horses. Okay, something you would not believe in this modern day and age, but that's what happened in the West Country coalfields. They wear the harness, and then the chain would go down between their legs and be attached to a wagon, and they'd have to crawl along and pull the wagons along. So it gives you some kind of insight into what happened. I mean, if anybody's actually been in the coal industry, obviously they would be much more better placed to talk about it than me. And I've only looked, sort of been down the Big Pit, and I've also watched interviews and films about the West Country and the West Country coalfields. And in the early 80s, I got to meet a couple of the miners. In fact, around the sort of Camerton area, Peasdown, Radstock area, a lot of the actual local community actually worked down the local mines. And in fact, if you actually went into some of the people's houses, you actually saw sort of memorabilia on the walls of the mining industry. But that's the West Country. That's the West Country. And like I say, if it hadn't have been for the coal, the Industrial Revolution would not have happened in Britain, certainly not on the scale that it did. And in fact, the reason why is that we had, like I said, we had plentiful supplies of coal. Now, the actual six-wheel towed brake van was actually introduced in 1901. So the van you can see going around on the back of the train was introduced in 1901. So they would have been actually on the rails, obviously, a good 20 years or more sooner than this locomotive. Because this locomotive, but you can imagine a locomotive like this perhaps putting one of these brake vans. And like I say, the reason why you needed a brake van is because they were loose fitted, the wagons. And so you needed a brake man at the back, so the actual locomotive would be providing the braking force, and then so would the person in the back in the brake van operating the brakes. Now, I don't have an entire fleet of coal wagons, but we've got a little bit of a variety of kind of a mixed train on here, and we'll have a little look at the mixed train in just a moment as well, and we can see what we're actually putting today. Okay, so now we're going to bring this one back. Now, as you can see, it's a very nice little runner. It actually runs quite slow, this one. In fact, it's quite low geared. Now, when I bought it, it was actually quite jerky in operation, and I had to take it completely to pieces. Now, the actual locomotive itself is what they call a split chassis locomotive, and it's basically two halves of the chassis, and in between is insulating blocks, and the axles are actually insulated too. And the idea is that the actual current passes from the track up one side of the chassis through the motor and back down the chassis plate on the other side and down onto the opposite rail. So in fact, there is no wiring inside these locomotives. They're quite clever. I mean, a lot of people actually sort of speak ill of these split chassis locomotives, but I've actually found it to be quite reliable and quite simple to work on. Probably probably one of the weak points on these is that the axles can go wrong, become loose in the wheels, and that allows the quarter to go out, and then the locomotive just grinds to a halt until it's fixed. But I don't know about these particular ones, but you can certainly buy axle sets for the Manor class. I'm sure they'll probably fit the other ones too, and you can buy those from Peter Spares. So you can actually buy spare axles for these split chassis locomotives. I would inquire if you're actually buying them, because I bought mine for a Manor class, which was also split chassis. Now, to put 1901 in context, that was the year Queen Victoria sadly passed away, our longest reigning monarch. And obviously now our own monarch has been on the throne for quite some considerable time. It was a change. It heralded a change. I mean, not only from the 1800s until from the 19th century into the 20th century. It also was the change from Victorian times to Edwardian times. That's when Edward VII came on the throne in 1901, I believe. And so that gives the actual brake van on the back of this some historical context too. And sometimes when we watch our models go around the track, we kind of sometimes forget that these are based on real locomotives, real wagons, real brake vans. These all existed in reality, and that when they did exist, or still exist in reality, certainly in the Welsh coalfields, that was a place, and certainly in the West Country coalfields, a scene of where of very, very hard work. Very, very hard work. Very hard times for people. But the coalfields did provide employment for people for many, many years. And in fact, certainly in Wales, whole families very often worked down the mine. So it went from, you know, from father to son, working down the mine. Because they were the biggest local employer. Now we're going to let this train go around one more time, and then we're going to have a little look at the actual train which is being pulled today. Okay, so we're just coming in now. And what I may do is go handheld for this. Well, we shall see. Okay, well let's bring the tripod round slightly, and we'll see if we can take a look at the actual train itself. We'll see how we can get the best light on everything too. I think what I'll do is I'll pop this one into reverse just slightly. You'll see my hand go in the way slightly, I'm afraid, because the controller is quite close to the track now. Right, so that's the locomotive itself, which we've talked about earlier, the Great Western Railway 062 coal tank. They carry the nickname of Taffy Tank. Now, Taffy is not meant to be an offensive nickname. In fact, my grandfather came from Wales. I think he came from Pontypridd, and he was known as Taffy. He was known as Taffy all his life. So, and a lot of people in Welsh are known as Taffy as a nickname, and it's more of a term of endearment. Okay, it's not meant to be anything offensive. Okay, so like I say, my grandfather was known as Taffy. And so here's one of these 062 tanks. We'll just move around just slightly more now. I'll change direction slightly. Now the wagon you can see in front of you there is hunting for coal. Now this was one of the ones which was featured in my Safe and the Skip series. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that I had a certain number of certain amount of model railway equipment offered to me that was kept in a very, very leaky shed, and it was going to be thrown in the skip, and I said, oh, no, I'd like to have it, please. And I've managed to save all of it, everything that was there, including the boxes, which were actually soaking wet. I mean, the boxes unfortunately did not survive in the best of condition. As you can see here, Blewitts, Howling, Cornwall, that's where it was actually bought, and it was bought for my nephew back in the early 2000s, I believe. Okay, and the train set that, you know, and all this model railway equipment that he had ended up being kept in, like I say, in a leaky shed, and this box was actually soaking wet. Okay, it had fallen to bits, and in fact I had to take some of the boxes to pieces to get the locomotives out. Now we're going to move on to the next wagon in just a moment. I can see it just there now, just coming into view. Sorry about that. Trying to see if we can get her to go into focus. Ah, there we go. This is a Lima NCB wagon. Lima is another company that's ceased to exist, but it does live on through Hornby. I think Hornby's carried on the name of Lima, and I do believe that they've got a range of locomotives out under the Lima name. Okay, probably intended for the European market. Well, this is the NCB, so this is National Coal Board. So this would have probably been in private days, and this is after nationalisation. The coal board was nationalised after World War II and stayed in public ownership then, and in fact it still is. In fact, the National Coal Board probably still exists. Obviously most of the coal fields have been closed now, and there's very little remaining of the actual coal industry. Obviously in today, when there's very much an awareness of global warming, people are actually moving away from coal. I mean, if they could find a clean way of actually using coal, then that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? But there we go. NCB. Oh, you can see it's got a full load of coal in there represented as well. Now the next one, oh, sorry about the hand getting in the way there. I'll come around a little bit more. Aha. Now, one of my favourites. We'll just move that out of the way. Again, another Lima wagon. I always wanted a beer wagon. I couldn't find many beer wagons. In fact, the last time I saw a wagon come up for sale, and it was in relation to a brewery in Dawlish, it sold for an astronomical price. Okay, but I managed to pick this one up quite reasonably priced. Now, Watney's beer, I think, went on into about the late 1980s, if I remember rightly, and it ceased to exist when the new rules and regulations came in over whether brewers could own their pubs exclusively, and a lot of the brewery companies actually went into sort of corporations, become more like property companies, and Watney's was one of the victims of it. A lot of people say that Watney's was not a very nice beer. It was obviously a keg beer. I can remember drinking it back in the days, and it seemed okay to me. Watney's beer. One of the most common ones you could find was Watney's. There was Watney's Starlight, Watney's Special. That was back in the 1970s, and Watney's Red Barrel. Okay, so that's Watney's. Okay, so that's a Lima. Now you can imagine. Maybe our miners and our railwaymen maybe going for a beer after a hard day's work. Perhaps they might go for fish and chips, who knows, and of course they want some salt to go on their fish and chips, or it's supposed to be bad for you, but I'm afraid I couldn't bear chips without salt on. Now here we go with the sacks of salt. Still in existence today, of course, sacks of salt. And I do believe this is a Dapple wagon. I'll just have a look for you. It's a... Yes, it is. You'll have to excuse me. Obviously, it's very, very hot up here today, and sweltering, and my brain is beginning to melt. This is another one as well. Fives Bananas. Interesting. They came in through the port of Avonmouth, close to us. And when they came off the ships, they were actually carried in sort of large conveyor belts with kind of canvas pouches, so that the fruit would not be damaged. Now, during the period of the war, of World War II, obviously, a lot of commodities were very, very hard to come by, and a banana was very, very much an exotic item. Okay, when they became really sort of readily available, a lot of people weren't even sure how to eat them. And of course, if you've never seen a banana, then you can understand it. You know, some people didn't even know you had to peel them first, okay, according to some stories. But the banana was a very, very great treat. In fact, I've eaten a banana today, very, very nice too. Okay, so that's five bananas. And of course, one of the Southern Railway locomotives was named after Fives, the Fives shipping line, Elder Fives. I do believe that is the same company, and that was a merchant navy class on the Southern Railway. It was called Elder Fives. Okay, so that's our banana wagon, and then we're going to move on to our tow brake van. Like I say, this particular one has got Bridport written on it. Now, if that's a case of Bridport, that's a town in Dorset. Now, whether or not there's more than one Bridport, I don't know. If anybody knows that if there's a name after a different Bridport, then please let me know. Okay, in the comments. Okay. Of course, as we say, it is a recent acquisition of mine from Oxford Rail. Okay, and it's got 2 very good reviews. Okay. A couple of reviews I've seen which are quite good. I think Jenny Kirk's done a video on it, and also A.D. Pullen's got one of these vans as well, and he's also done a video. So that's a couple of channels worth looking up if you want to find out more about them. Okay, and really with me, I'll talk about the actual models themselves as much as I can, but I like to also talk about the history of particular vehicles on there, and I hope I've given you some insight as to the history of the coal industry, and obviously that's what these brake wagons were intended for. Okay, and certainly what the locomotive was intended for, which was actually pulling the train today. Okay, now I hope you found this of interest today for you, and if you like what you see, give me a like. If you want to see more videos by me, then subscribe and ring the alarm bell as well, and then you'll be able to get to see more of my videos. There are other videos on my channel, Paul Cherry Trains. Now, thank you very much for your interest. Thank you for watching, and before this heat gets too much for me up in this room, I'm going to nip downstairs now and have a nice refreshing drink, and I shall bid you farewell. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.